So this is the review session for Linn-Mar High School AP Unit 4 Celebration over Cognition. Involves these areas: learning, thinking, memory, language, and we've talked a lot about concept maps as they relate to cognition. So I hope that if you haven't taken the time to do one or haven't looked at the white wall, this would be a good time to chunk all this information so you remember it better. And we've done, as usual, a lot of application practice in class. And so look back and see what we've done, and especially if you have been gone. There's no way to make up the conversations, but you better at least look at the activities. You will regret it if you haven't done that. And as always, study guides, study groups, online reviews, and so forth. Keep in mind also that we have a lot of, as we will continue to see throughout the course, a lot of scaffolding, a lot of application of concepts we've learned in previous units that are now repeated and applied in the current unit. So do you remember things like the importance of the myelin sheath, the neural impulse? Yes, you made those out of Play-Doh. Generalizability of research. Parallel processing that happens unconsciously, split brain individuals, and even Broca's area to help us with language. Some key people, you had review sheets on these, but we've got Bandura, we've got Chomsky, we've got Ebbinghaus, we've got Pavlov, Skinner, and please note for Skinner, we talked about him in the learning unit with operant conditioning, as well as the language unit. For acquiring language. Thorndike, poor neglected Thorndike that always gets overlooked. Watson, the father of behaviorism. Elizabeth Loftus, the memory researcher who talked about basically the ease of implanting false memories. Garcia's work that shows not only the biological predisposition for classical conditioning, but the exception of how the NS and the US don't have to be right together if there's a very strong UR. Wolfgang Kohler and his chimps, Tolman and his mice, Worf and his language, linguistic determinism, and have fun making up your own matching exercise if you want to. That's a great idea, not just with definitions, but with application. Okay, for the learning concepts, again, a lot of this was review from Intro Psych, so hopefully it will all be good. Make sure you know the differences between the two types of associative learning, classical and operant, along with the different types of cognitive learning. And yes, we do have cognitive components even in those associative or behavioral theories, and the biological influence of learning. That was mentioned several times in your reading. So for instance, chimps are going to learn better if they have to climb for food rather than dig for food, or rats are going to learn better if they can pick up food with their hands rather than move it with their tails. Make sure you can do all of the alphabet soup, the US, the NS, the CS, all of that good stuff, as well as know the consequences, positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment, the acquisition process of classical conditioning. Again, you've got examples in your binder. We did several in class. And this is what was new, schedules of reinforcement. Again, we've done a lot of examples in class, so go back and look those over. And then the difference between shaping, I get a whole bunch of reinforcement as I'm initially learning, versus chaining. Now that I've learned, I can put more things together before I get reinforced. And then the over-justification effect. You've got to tell me how it starts out as being intrinsic, moves to extrinsic due to the rewards, and so the rewards become the most important part. Then we did memory, 3 days on memory. There are 3 parts to memory: sensory memory, and then short-term / working memory, and then long-term memory. Make sure you can break all of those down. What are the 3 parts of the sensory memory? What are the branches of long-term memory? Not just not just illicit and implicit, but also episodic, semantic, skilled, and classical conditioning. And then the 3 parts of the process. Encoding, remember, that's where we want to spend a lot of time in encoding, so that makes the storage and retrieval that much easier. With encoding, also make sure that you know the difference between effortful and the 4 automatic types of encoding. We've done several examples in class. Go back, look at your notes. And then the difference between recall versus recognition and relearning. Hopefully most of this is all relearning for you. It should happen much faster. Recall, specifically look at encoding positions, encoding strategies like the serial position effect, which involves primacy and recency. The idea of forgetting and misremembering. There's the 7 deadly sins of forgetting, but remember, sometimes forgetting is just misremembering. And then the biological aspects. We colored in the parts of the brain. We're never going to get away from the brain because whatever is psychological is simultaneously biological. And with Plato, we did the long-term potentiation where you divided up the dendrites, you increased the myelin sheath to increase the efficiency at the synapse. And the idea of memory trace, those pathways through the brain that become strengthened with rehearsal. Then we went into thinking, and with thinking we again talk about organizing. This is one of the many times we've talked about the importance of organizing. We have concepts, our mental schemas, we've got the prototype, the ideal picture within our concepts, and then we've got hierarchies. Again, we've talked about hierarchies, the idea that you have a topic and then subtopics underneath it many times. Strategies for remembering, kind of similar to everything else we've talked about. Priming, once again. Algorithms, trying every aspect versus heuristic, those mental shortcuts. And framing, I want to frame my words, I want to pick my words so I can get a specific outcome from you. Insight, aha, creative thinking, and those things that lead to creative thinking. There were 5 aspects there. And then there were many obstacles when it comes to thinking, and you've got on binder page 20 a practice exercise with that as well. So I'd go back and look at the differences between all of those things. For language development, make sure you know the stages, what's universal, what's household, and what ages are they approximate. Make sure you know for the parts of language the difference between morphemes, which are the meanings, and phonemes, which are the sound. Like I hear sound over my phone, so that's an easy way to remember it. Semantics, the meaning, versus syntax, the word order. Lexicon, just be able to recognize that word. Lexicon, basically your dictionary. And then theories of acquisition, Skinner versus Chomsky, nurture versus nature. And then Benjamin Whorf, once again, the linguistic determinism. And then for the FRQs, remember, as always, full sentences, use the SOTA method, write in paragraphs. Your goal is to leave no doubt in the grader's mind. These are going to cause you to use some critical thinking skills, which, hey, that should be expected, especially in this unit on cognition. Get it? Cognition, thinking. Okay, anyway. So with the first FRQ, they're both kind of scenario related, but make sure that you're flexible in your thinking and prepared in your understanding so that if you're given a research example that you can think of as you're looking at results of that, how are some of those thinking obstacles going to play into how you look at your results? What about the aspects of your personal or the researcher's long-term memory? How can that play a part? How can reinforcement schedules play a part? Make sure that you know the difference between correlational versus experimental research, even if in the FRQ you have to switch from going from correlational to experimental. Read those carefully. And then make sure that you could graph the results. Maybe you'll have to make a bar graph. Maybe you'll have to do a scatter plot. You'll have to read to see if I'm doing correlational studies, then I want to do a scatter plot. If I'm doing experiments, then probably a bar graph. So again, read carefully. And then language acquisition, or excuse me, language, learning a language, I guess that's the same for the second FRQ. Again, this will be scenario based, but some of the things you're going to have to do in explaining situations will be knowing the brain lateralization, which means specialization, for the parts of language, as well as the parts of memory. So hopefully you still remember all the parts of the brains and their function. That should be relearning. And then also the learning processes. How do we learn language? We already talked about acquisition, but think about learning itself as far as associative versus cognitive types of learning. Think about encoding methods. If I want to learn Portuguese, how can I learn that language? How can I make sure as I test coming up that I can remember everything I need to remember? So yeah, that's it. There's a lot of stuff. Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. I know you'll do great.